Hello YouTubers, I just wanted to make a follow-up video for the 2007 Honda Accord with the 4-cylinder engine on how to fix the stalling issue with the throttle body wiring harness. And basically I learned a few things after trying it several times, and I was previously using these butt connectors, and basically you slip the wire in here and you slip one end in, slip the other end in, and then you crimp it with, say, one of these like wire crimpers, and it does make a very solid connection. And originally I did this twice and found out that I was still having intermittent stalling issues, and after all this trial and error, I believe the problem is, since the throttle body is a sensor connection, it sends a very specific voltage to the computer, and these butt connectors are aluminum inside, and I believe that since the original wire is copper and it's not actually touching, that it adds resistance to the connection and it throws off the voltage ever so slightly, that the computer is getting a faulty reading and it doesn't know what to do with it. So in turn, I ended up cutting all these butt connections off and then redoing the wiring harness again. But this time, I soldered the connections, and Eric the Car Guy has a really good video for how to solder, and my camera's not really focusing the greatest on this, but basically you want to braid it so that it looks like almost like a pretzel. So it's all twisted together, and if it's tight enough, you could actually give it a little tug and it's secure. That way you can do the solder for that. And with it being inside the engine bay, it's really hard to solder with like two hands and try and hold this connection together. So you want to make sure you can get it braided to the point where it's holding together so that you can solder it. And basically, so basically what I used is, I just used this flux. I believe it was available at Lowe's, and you squeeze a little bit on there, get your soldering iron, and solder. Like I said, you pretty much need two hands to do this, so I just used this Radio Shack 60x40 rosin core solder, and I find that the thinner solder works the best because it doesn't clump up as much, and it makes it so you can do just enough solder so it's not too bulky. And as I forgot to put on, you want to make sure, I used this marine heat shrink when I did it because I wanted it to be waterproof. You could get this at Harbor Freight, and it works very well, and it comes in all different sizes. I believe the smallest will be good for this application. But basically, you take your wires and you slip on your heat shrink. Make sure you have enough to cover as much as you've exposed as far as the copper goes, and you want to have a little bit extra to overlap so that it melts to the insulation on the existing wire. And this isn't a really good wire to use an example since it's solid and the car uses braided, but you basically just want to make an X with it, and Eric the Car Guy does a really good job of showing this. So you make an X, or you could make these little hooks. Like this. And then you want to push each end down and twist it together like that. And then if you get it right, it'll hold together. I can't really do this while I'm on camera too easily, since it's really hard to bend that solid copper, but I had it together previously, and that's pretty much what you do. And you melt the solder on there, and I basically use this Craftsman soldering iron, and I don't recommend it at all, to be honest. I don't like it. I've spent like 10 minutes trying to get hot enough just to melt the solder, and it doesn't work very well. I don't know if I have a bad one. I mean, I know some people like it, but I don't recommend it. So I would find a better one if I were to do it again. You could also strip your wires. This Harbor Freight wire stripper works good enough if you don't use it every day. If you're gonna do this for a living, I would get a set of Klein. They're just way better and they'll last a lot longer. And yes, if you don't use heat shrink, I melted this with a butane torch. Once it was in there, you could also use electrical tape. I recommend the 33 plus. I mean, once this stuff heats up, it doesn't get sticky like the generic stuff does, and it holds up a lot better. And if you ever have to take it off, it doesn't make a mess, so I highly recommend it. But anyway, I recommend using these heat shrinks because they're way more waterproof and you don't have to worry about it coming undone like you would with the electrical tape. Not that it will, but there's a chance it could. Well, basically, once you do get this soldered together, it fixed my stall for good because, I mean, once you solder these connections, it's copper on copper, and I believe that without the little resistance from this piece of aluminum in between, it was getting the exact voltage the computer wanted to see from the sensor, and that was pretty much all it needed. I mean, these butt connections work great for everything, which I learned the hard way. Everything else that's like non-sensor based, I would say these are great. They save time, and there's a lot of spaces where you just can't get in the solder, so they work great for tight spaces where you can't get anything else in there. But I guess from my experience, I've never done a rewire job for a sensor component or anything that sends a critical voltage where it's like so low voltage and it needs to be so accurate that it wasn't ever a problem for me. I mean, I've used these for car stereo wiring, anything that has powers like speaker wire, anything like a headlight or tail light, turn signal, anything that just receives power voltage that doesn't have to be exact, it just needs to light up basically, then they work great. And it doesn't matter that there's a little bit of resistance there with the aluminum in between the copper, and I mean, they hold very strong. But if you need specific voltage, like for a sensor component, I would say solder all the way, because I learned the hard way that it's gonna cause problems at some point. So I hope you found this video helpful, and hopefully just use these where you have like a solid power connection. You don't need specific voltage because it's gonna alter the voltage reading the computer sees, and it's not gonna know what to do with it. So hope you found this helpful.